Hi and welcome to History Makers. I'm Matt Prater. Today we're chatting with Danielle from Release International. We've been here at the Voice of the Martyrs International Conference, hearing some amazing speakers from all over the world. Then we're going to hear a bit of Danielle's story. So tell us a bit of your background. Where were you born and raised?
I was born in England, raised in England, but moved overseas at 17.
Oh, okay. Did you have like a religious upbringing?
Christian family, both my parents, my grandparents, so yeah, very blessed with a Christian home.
Were you like a prodigal child, or like was there a born again experience? What happened?
To be honest, I cannot remember a day without Jesus.
Okay.
I've been told stories where I was 3 going into hospitals asking doctors, like, oh, do you believe in Jesus? And like,
Really?
so I've just always
loved
him. He's always been there. So yeah, no big prodigal story. Just very grateful to have always known him.
And what was your early career like? What did you do after school? Did you study or work, or what did you do?
Yeah, so my story is a little bit strange in that I actually dropped out of school quite young. So at 16 I went into full-time ministry in the UK, and then at 17 I moved to Mozambique. I'd heard about this missionary, Heidi and Roland Baker, and they do a missionary training school, and the really short version is I went out and stayed out.
Wow.
And so many years later I am still working for Iris, working with Iris.
Amazing.
So it's been an interesting journey, but then came back to the UK to study.
Okay. Well, I've always been inspired by Heidi and Roland Baker, and I remember just one of her sayings that impacted me so much. She said, "You've got to leave the 99 and stop for the one." And, you know, she does that with, you know, orphans and all sorts of, you know, people in difficult circumstances in Mozambique and other parts of the world. And, you know, it's great to do it overseas, but we've also got to do it in our local backyard. It's
Absolutely.
so important. Both and not either or, you know.
Absolutely.
So let's talk a bit more about your journey. So you're in Mozambique for a while. What did you do after that?
So when I was in Mozambique, I was working with the missionary training schools, and then they asked if I'd get involved with some of the new missionary training schools they were starting. So they started some in Micronesia, one in America, so travelled a little bit with my role for that. But then really wanted to study theology. So I went back to the UK, did an undergraduate in applied theology, and then wanted to go straight back to the mission field, but ended up having a stroke and some pretty serious health complications.
Wow.
Ended up in a wheelchair, but still had a real heart for missions. It never stopped.
Wow.
So started working for a Pentecostal denomination in the UK, overseeing their missions training and sending. So still taking teams. I remember one time I was leading a team to Romania in a wheelchair.
Wow.
Like I look back and think, what? Why? What were you doing? But at the time it was the obvious yes. When Jesus asked you to do something. So yeah, stayed involved in missions. But while I couldn't go back overseas, did a master's in contemporary missiology.
Wow.
And then this year, things have changed, and God seems to have said yes to the timing, and I moved back overseas, and I'm currently living in Southeast Asia. And starting an organisation to support missionaries and organisations and churches to get involved in missions through free resources and training.
Wonderful. Now, you're under the banner of Release.
Yes.
Tell us how that is connected to Voice of the Martyrs and what's the partnership?
So Release International is part of a wider organisation, the International Christian Association, and it's made up of lots of different organisations, many of which are Voice of the Martyrs. And so they come together every year to meet and have fellowship, but also to strategically partner together. And I think for me that's been really encouraging to actually see in person this year. It's the first time I've been able to come and see it, and just to see so many people in the room who have a heart, as you said earlier, to stop for the one, and to stop for those who have been persecuted for their faith. And so that's what Release International do. They're part of that wider movement of organisations who support those who have been persecuted for believing in Jesus from all different parts of the world.
Now, I heard a great discussion you're having with one of our colleagues during the conference about some of the study you've been doing in missiology, and talking about the importance of making sure we've got the right focus in missions, and it's not all about look at me, look what I'm doing, but actually just doing the work.
Yeah.
Do you want to just explain your
Okay.
your studies there?
I'll try and keep it brief because I could definitely talk for too long. So growing up in church and growing up in missions, I have had the honour and privilege of meeting some incredible people along the way, many of whom are here in this room who have a real heart just to serve. But I've also met potentially people who still have a heart to serve Jesus, but maybe have let the temptation to make the story more about them get in the way.
Yeah.
And to be honest, it's a very understandable problem because you've got churches all around the world who are giving financially to support missions and would like to hear back what's happened with that money, what have you done with what I've given you, because it makes you feel good too, to be honest.
Right.
And so that can put a pressure on missionaries to then share really good stories and sometimes exaggerated stories of perhaps what they've seen, and it can become a little bit of catch-22. And that's one of the reasons I love being here, because that's not the focus in the slightest. Chances are you haven't heard of many or any of the people that the Voice of the Martyrs and Release International are supporting. But their faith is some of the strongest that I've ever encountered in anybody, because they know what it means to give everything, literally everything up to their life for Jesus. So that became the focus of my studies, really, was how can we embrace humility when we're serving cross-culturally in missions and ministry. Because I think at the end of the day, it's Jesus who deserves all the glory and all the praise. And trust me, from having been involved in missions and ministry for a long time now, at least it feels like a long time now, I've probably made more mistakes than most, and I think we all make mistakes.
We certainly have all made mistakes.
Having humility is needed.
It's, and I just think about, Jesus went into Jerusalem on a donkey.
Exactly.
Not a big cult or a big fanfare. He just went,
Well, if anyone could have.
That's right. And he washed his disciples' feet and said, go and do the same, told them to serve. I think there's also a temptation in this day and age to put everything on social media and on the radio and, make it, and speak evangelistically, stretch the truth to make, and like you say, you've got to tell the story for the people who are supporting you. But there's a way to do it in humility, or there's a way to do it to bring glory to yourself, and so I like the way that you're challenging all of us to make sure that, we're serving in humility, I guess the other thing I wanted to ask about that is, when it comes to Voice of the Martyrs, I've struggled to get some interviews this week because some of them said no. I don't want to be interviewed. And it's very countercultural. It's the opposite of, Now, one of the reasons they don't want to be interviewed is because if their name and face gets out on social media or on the radio, their lives could be in danger. So that's a fair point too. But it's also the opposite of a lot of westernised Christianity, isn't it? We need to get back to the heart of the gospel of just doing what God's told us to do. Absolutely. And not doing it to show everyone what we're doing, but just to do what we're called to do.
Absolutely. And it's not an area that I have 100% an answer for yet. I'm still working that through, and I think I always will be, because there is something so beautiful in the power of testimony and sharing the stories. So I love that you are doing interviews and hearing some of the stories, because they encourage the global church to go, oh my goodness, look at how Jesus is moving through people's lives. Look at, it makes me think, look how incredible our God is, look what he can do. Trust me, if you knew me, you'd know that some of the stories where I've seen God move have nothing to do with me.
That's right.
So I think there is so much power in sharing those stories to bring him glory, but it's the how and the heart behind it. So I'm still looking for wisdom in the right way to share some of these stories, but thank you for all that you do, because it's really powerful.
Well, I just pinch myself that I get to chat to all these amazing people this week. And I just think, wow, it's amazing that the Lord's opened this door. So the other verse I thought of on that topic is, Jesus said, when you give to the poor, don't let your right hand see what your left hand's, and don't be like the hypocrites, blow the trumpets and stand, just do it in secret, and you'll be rewarded. It says in Scripture, which is something I think it's important to remind people. You might be rewarded on this earth, be rewarded in heaven. It's up to the Lord how He rewards us, but it's about giving in secret and doing works for the Lord in secret, not like, look at me, So, I think in this social media generation, selfie generation with our iPhones, our iPads, our iPods, it's all about, we need to ask this question. So I'm glad you've raised it, and hopefully people listening and watching to this will be thinking, I need to just get on with the job and not always just tell people the job that I'm doing, There's got to be that balance, doesn't there?
And why are you really sharing it?
Yeah.
What are you actually hoping to get out of it?
Yeah.
I didn't think I was going to mention this,
Yes.
but we spoke earlier about the visit that we did to the demilitarized zone.
Yes.
When we were in Korea, and I think one of the things I really struggled with is you mentioned this selfie generation, and obviously in the context of us being here for Voice of the Martyrs, we know that going to the Korean border is an incredibly moving experience, because we know what's happening to Christians in Korea, in North Korea, and to be at the observatory and to see people taking very jovial selfies of like, look where I am, and turning into a social media post. It was a very bizarre experience.
It was. Absolutely.
And I just wonder whether we've hit a point of desensitization of actually some of the experiences and some of the stories, and just how powerful and moving they really are. So I would just encourage anyone posting anything on social media to have a pause and think.
Yep, absolutely.
What is this really about? And is it for validation personally, and is that really healthy?
Yeah. Yep, good question to ask. And like I even think about, I run a soup kitchen at my church, right? And I post every week about, the guest speaker and what they said, and this person's testimony, and I try and make it about what's happening there, because I'm a pastor and I want to promote what's happening so that we get more volunteers, so that people will donate, so that people will think to do it themselves in their church, But every now and then I'll get someone go, why are you always posting about that? I'm like, if I was making any money out of it, or if I was, getting likes or followers out of it, if I'm an influencer and I'm doing it, but that's not my motivation. I'm doing it because I want to get the word out that we should all be doing that, So
it's a powerful tool.
It is, that's
and
right.
Just like any tool.
It
can be used for good or bad. But I think it's very, like I said, become quite desensitized. So it's just checking back in and having a little bit of a health check, I think, and kind of going, okay, what am I posting? Why am I posting it? And who am I really posting it for?
Good question. Now, the conference here, we've had speakers from North Korea, Somalia, Ethiopia, Mexico, amazing. And every one of them's had a different angle and a different story. Is there any highlights for you?
Yes. I've got two, so
yes.
It's a little bit greedy.
You can go with two, that's okay.
One has just been actually the fellowship around the dining room. And actually just those kind of coffee moments. And just hearing people sharing their experiences, and it's almost like snippets of stories. So you're not even getting the whole story, but it's enough of someone's testimony to go, oh my goodness, that's incredible. And the way that God's moved is phenomenal. And in an environment like this, where people are involved in serving the persecuted church, something that would be quite radical, I think, for the average person is almost quite normal here. And with this being my first time, just hearing some of the conversations and what's being said, it's quite shocking. But in a really encouraging way to get to hear it. So that's been one highlight. But in regards to the speakers, which was the question you actually asked me, I think this morning we heard from a gentleman who had defected from North Korea, and his story was incredibly moving, very powerful. But one of the lines that he said that really just jumped out to me was he said the way that he would describe his life is moving from hopelessness to hope.
Yeah.
And I thought, what a powerful story, what a powerful message to have from experiencing suffering that I couldn't even imagine to now training as a pastor.
Amazing.
And to live in the hope of Christ. I think it's a powerful message to each and every one of us. What does it look like in our life to move towards hopefulness? It's very convicting.
One of the lines that stood out to me was when he shared that, he'd been horribly burnt and he had scars all over his hands and, and when he came to the Lord, he felt the Lord say, I know all your scars and you're beautiful.
I don't think there was a dry eye in the room.
Oh my goodness. And I thought, well, that's just what the Lord does, doesn't he? No matter what our mess is, no matter how bad things have been, and the fact that now he's training to be a pastor and he's praying for unification between North and South Korea. And he wants to go back and preach to North Korea. Like, most people would want to get as far away from possible from that, but he feels called to go back. Amazing. So that's certainly, a massive prayer point, North Korea, and
that's some of the copy moments I was talking about. Is very similar stories of people who have come out of really extreme persecution, but now risking their lives to share the faith with people from their own home country. Whereas I think in myself, I would most likely, as you mentioned, want to run in the other direction, not be thinking, okay, how can I go back? And that's just so confronting to our cultural mindset of safety, what suits me, what's everything we just kind of touched on with social media, or what makes me feel good. And it's so counter to the message of the gospel.
It is. One of my favourite interviews I ever did was with Helen Bahane from Eritrea.
We worked with her at Release International. She's incredible.
Amazing woman. And one of her lines was, she said, I didn't have freedom, yet I felt compelled to preach the gospel. She said, you in the West, you have freedom and you can preach the gospel, but you don't. And I thought, wow, that's one of the good things about this ministry. It's a wake-up call. When we hear these stories about people under extreme persecution who still preach the gospel. And in the West, we sit back and go to church for 2 hours on a Sunday and maybe go to midweek, maybe volunteer here and there and do our little bit. But these guys lay down their lives for the Lord. And that's what Jesus told us. Deny yourself, take up your cross and follow me. And that's certainly a challenge to all of us.
It is, and that's what I love about Release International, is that yes, they serve and support the persecuted church, but they see that very much as a two-way thing. And so one of the things that we even had conversations about just this week is persecuted discipleship, and what are the lessons that for us as the church we can learn from those who have experienced persecution, because they have such a powerful message to share with us who've never experienced such a thing and maybe get complacent at times. We need to learn from them. So they really facilitate actively that two-way partnership, which I think is so valued and so beautiful. And similarly, one of the things that I have seen modeled by many missionaries that I work with is that laying down of your life entirely and giving all of you, not just a couple of times a week, for every moment. And we can do that wherever we are. You don't just have to be a missionary out to Southeast Asia, wherever God's put you. What does it look like in every moment to pursue Him, despite complacency and despite what's maybe comfortable, but to seek Him first?
Amen. So good. One of my favourite sayings is that we're called to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And I think we've we've definitely afflicted the comfortable in this interview today. Well, it's been awesome to hear about your work in Southeast Asia with Release International. Pray for the Lord's blessing on you.
Thank you.
I reckon you're a history maker. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.